If you are considering buying or selling a property in the Pittsburgh region in 2026, then this video is for you. The primary goal of this video is to give you my predictions. I want to let you know where I think the market is heading in the four main areas of the market: inventory, interest rates, prices, and the number of sales. So be sure to bookmark this, come back in a year, see if I was right, leave your comments below what you think might happen in 2026. My name is Mark McClinchie, and I'm a real estate agent here in the Pittsburgh area with Compass Real Estate. I've been posting videos and content on YouTube for the past 5 years. I've really enjoyed giving out information about our region, our neighborhoods, our schools, the things to do in this great city. And that really has been the core of my business, is attracting folks from out of the area that are unfamiliar with the Pittsburgh region, learn more about it as they consider a relocation to this area. So when I look at the Pittsburgh real estate market, the two defining characteristics are stability and affordability. The stability piece is really important just because as we follow some of the national trends, it just doesn't peak as high. We don't have those sharp corners of dips and valleys. Pittsburgh tends to be kind of slow, steady, and somewhat predictable. Obviously, the pandemic threw everything in kind of whack and really screwed up inventory and did a lot to disrupt the real estate market. But we're kind of back to being that stable market. And I'll talk about more what I think might happen in 2026. I also just want to talk about the affordability piece. As far as the affordability piece goes, Pittsburgh really is an outlier. I understand it's a matter of context, and home prices still, even in the Pittsburgh area, can be high in specific markets. And, affordability is a major issue. However, if you put it in the context of the national real estate market, there just are so many areas that are just out of reach. Pittsburgh makes it more affordable for first-time home buyers. So, don't take my word for it. Let me point to a couple headlines that recently hit the national stage in the past year. Let me dive into some of those. So one of the best articles that was recently published by the Washington Post outlined how Pittsburgh became one of the most affordable cities in the country. And so it went into our history about it being one of the richest places in the country, centuries back, of course, and our manufacturing past, and how the steel industry, once we introduced foreign competition, really struggled in the 70s and 80s. And you sort of had a mass exodus of population in Pittsburgh, leaving a ton of inventory. And that inventory is kind of what we have today. We just don't have super tight inventory. Now, that isn't true in, every single market, but just generally speaking, particularly at the lower price points, which is kind of the whole point of affordability, is how do you get a home where you can live, where it might be more affordable than renting, which I'll get to in just a second, and really, build some appreciation and really give yourself a chance at home ownership, which really right now in 2026 is almost impossible in many places. My kids, are in their 20s, and, it's a real challenge for the places they're currently living in to be able to afford a home. And maybe they'll move back to Pittsburgh and try the housing options here are certainly going to be more affordable. My oldest currently lives in Washington, D.C., and it's super expensive there. The Washington Post, put together this article that really does outline. I highly recommend it. I'll put a link in the description. It talks about the history of Pittsburgh and the housing market and all the details that are really important as to how we became one of the most affordable markets in the country. The next article that I just teased, it was Realtor.com identified Pittsburgh as the only metro area of the top 50 that it is cheaper to buy a home than it is to rent. So in the 50 largest US cities, 49 of them, it was cheaper to rent than buy a home. Whereas in Pittsburgh, it is actually cheaper to buy a home than it is to rent. And the data that they used, you can dig into the source itself. It's down in the description. But essentially, it's saying that your average rent is going to be about $1,500 a month, whereas your average payment on 10% down is going to be about $1,300. So it was a consistent comparison. And in all of those places, it was much cheaper to rent than it was to buy. So Pittsburgh being the exception to that. And then the last source that I want to mention is from Forbes magazine. They identified a list of the most livable cities in the world. But then near the end of the article, they actually did the top 10 US cities to live in. And again, it's kind of a broad definition. It's not only the housing market, but the economy, the infrastructure, education, all the factors that would go into livability. And they identified Pittsburgh as the number 3 most livable city in the United States. So there you have it. Got a couple different sources there, among many others, that talk about Pittsburgh's strength as a real estate market, affordability, its stability. So I hope that allows you to understand how the Pittsburgh real estate market operates and what I want to do now is get more specific into what I think will happen in 2026. You know, when it comes to making predictions, it's kind of fun, it's lighthearted, but I really want to take this seriously and really give you good advice, both buyers and sellers. You know, obviously sometimes predictions and we sort of hear what we want to hear. And, you know, buyers, of course, want there to be tons of inventory. They want the prices to be low. They want it to be easy to find a house. Sellers, well, sellers is a little more complicated, right? Because a lot of sellers are also buying, and sellers want it both ways. You know, sellers want to sell their house with very little competition from other homes. So they want tight inventory, and they of course want bidding wars, and they want as high a price as they can get for their house. Of course, if they have to go out and buy, then they don't want those situations. So let me address these one at a time. Let me start with inventory. So inventory is the basis of everything. We can't have a real estate market unless there's homes for sale. So everything builds off of that. That's important to understand. And since the pandemic, we've had tight inventory. We've had sellers who are locked into super low interest rates and they don't feel like they can sell. It just doesn't make any sense to give up a 2.5% interest rate, sell your home, and then have to start over with a new interest rate. So we had that lock-in effect, but that's starting to loosen significantly, and I'll get to interest rates in a minute. As far as inventory, my prediction is we will have a meaningful increase in inventory, the number of homes for sale over this past year. You know, I don't know the exact number, you know, but it'll be somewhere around 5 to 10% is my prediction. I think there'll be some areas where inventory remains tight. You know, it's always going to be hyper local. You know, take all of this real estate advice and predictions with a grain of salt, because we're averaging things. We're looking at an entire market and trying to say what we think thousands and thousands of homes are going to do. Meanwhile, you're only worried about buying one or selling one. And of course, you know, it might follow the trends, but it might not. There's always, you know, ways that you can be strategic and defy those odds. But generally speaking, I'm predicting we're going to have higher inventory. So this means there's going to be more homes to look at. It also means for sellers that you're going to have competing against more homes. You know, this past fall of 2025, we saw the buyer urgency really slow down and then inventory increase. And we just didn't see a ton of sales. I expect that to be different in 2026. And I think it's just people getting used to where the interest rates are, getting used to the market, and getting used to, you know, the choices that are out there. So next, we'll talk about interest rates. Right now, we're sitting in, you know, around 6.25. That's been a pleasant, you know, kind of decline. We were not that long ago above 7% interest rates. And I do think there's this magic number that is psychological more than anything. But I think if we get below 6 for a consistent period of time, I think we will see a large amount of activity in the real estate market, particularly in the Pittsburgh area, where buyers have been on the sidelines for many years, who have thought about buying, but maybe we're priced out. Maybe they've been saving, and maybe they've been just waiting for rates to come down a little bit. And we have had high rates for the last few years. And so I do think when we get below 6, there's going to be a psychological effect. So I can't guarantee it. You know, we might just hover around 6, but I think that's going to be something really to watch out for. If we're just slightly above 6 the entire year, then maybe things will be a little sluggish. I'm going to be optimistic and say that we're going to be below 6. I don't think it's going to be by much. We're certainly not going to go, you know, to the low 5s. And certainly for anyone out there thinking we're going to return to, you know, the pandemic era where we had interest rates in the 3s or even just sub 5, I just don't think that's happening for a long time. But if we get below 6, I do think that could be a meaningful change in the market, and we'll see a lot more buyer activity if we can get rates below 6. I think we'll also get more sellers willing to exchange their current low interest rates if they can get something below 6 as well. So that's my prediction on interest rates. All right, and for my third prediction around sales activity, I think we're definitely going to see an increase in sales activity, you know, somewhere in the order of 5 to 10%. So again, back to my point at the beginning of this video that Pittsburgh, you know, is kind of stable, slow and steady. You know, that might actually be a little bit aggressive with that prediction, but it'll be an improvement on the number of sales. We've just had such low sales since the pandemic, and so we're climbing out of that. You know, it's not going to be, you know, a rocket ship to the moon with a huge increase right away. I think a lot of people would like to see that, but I do think it'll be meaningful. I think we're going to start setting the stage for a more active real estate market here in the Pittsburgh region. So one more thing to add about the sales activity and sales volume is, you know, there definitely are seasonal impacts, which are probably more meaningful than the overall. You know, we see the spring market, which we're kind of in now, at least from a buyer mindset. Sellers are kind of lagging behind, but we see a lot of sales activity in the spring and summer, and then we see things fall off in the fall. I do think the fall of 2026, I mean, that's way out there. That's really crystal ball kind of making a pretty wild prediction because it's way out there. But I think we'll get some momentum, and you know, people will start hearing about there's more sales, and that's going to encourage other people to get out there, particularly sellers. So sellers have been sitting on their hands for quite a while, holding off on that next stage to sell their home and move to downsize or upsize, and everyone's been locked in. So the increased sales volume will be driven primarily by sellers. So we're now at my final prediction for 2026 in the Pittsburgh real estate market, which is around home prices. I think they're going to go up, but I don't think they're going to go up by a lot. And again, that's going to be the average. And that's the mistake people are going to make, because they're going to think all homes are going to go up a little bit. And that's not going to be the case. There's going to be a lot of homes that are going to dip down. And then there's going to be a lot of homes that are going to have record high prices. And it's going to depend on location, but that's not going to be the most important factor. The most important factor is actually going to be the condition of the home, whether or not it's move-in ready. And that's where sellers have the most control, but some of them might get too excited and not take this stage seriously and just throw their house on the market without properly preparing it for the market. But I do think that those homes that are prepared, those homes that are priced correctly, are going to see the benefits of getting higher prices. Again, they won't be through the moon, but they will be meaningful rises in prices, hopefully not too steep for buyers to get priced out. But again, a lot of it's going to be the condition of the home and whether or not you know which market you're in. So it's kind of two markets. I think I've mentioned this in other videos where, you know, we definitely have a two-tiered system, and the homes that are move-in ready and in high demand and have done all their work to get ready for the market, they're going to perform really well at the top of the market. And then those homes that are, you know, need a lot of work, need a lot of renovations, buyers don't have those kinds of funds typically, not in the Pittsburgh market at least. And so there is less interest and less appetite for buyers to buy things that need a significant amount of work: new bathrooms, new kitchens, new roof, new boiler, new furnace. So I think it's important to pay attention to what market you're in. But overall, I do think we'll see some meaningful improvement to prices, just steady, you know, small growth in the 3 to 5% range, kind of modest growth on home prices. Now that you have my predictions for meaningful increases in inventory, modest dips in interest rates, modest increases to sales volume, and modest increases to home prices, none of that really matters unless you know, once you get out in the market, how to navigate it. And you definitely need an expert to guide you. I'd be glad to guide you, like so many of my clients that reach out to me, set up a consultation, whether you're buying or selling. Be glad to give you specific advice for your situation. But let me give some general advice for buyers, and then I'll give some general advice for sellers. If you're a buyer, you've got to be aware of the market you're in. As I mentioned, that two-tier market. Every time you see a house, you've got to put it in context. Which market is this? Is this the super competitive, low inventory, tight market because it's a move-in ready home that everybody's going to want? Or is this house going to sit a little longer? Maybe it's overpriced, needs a lot of work. Is it going to languish? Do I have an opportunity with that house? Do I want to take on those projects? Maybe I could get a great deal and make it worth it. So awareness is really important. My best advice for buyers is speed. Always been speed. It always will be speed. The quicker you can get to a home, the quicker you can be first to make a decision. Doesn't mean you're going to get there first and make the decision that you're going to buy it, but you got to try to be quick with your decision before the rest of the market gives there. Don't give it time. Right now, we will have slightly higher days on market, but your advantage is speed. You know, don't wait till the weekend if you can't. Try to go midweek. Speed to see the home. If you're going to make an offer, speed on making the offer. Avoid a bidding war because you're first. So that's my advice for buyers, is get there quickly and make a decision quickly. And my last piece of advice, which you might find ironic, is to ignore predictions, ignore stats. You know, don't follow the herd. Don't follow the latest headline of what interest rates are doing or what prices are doing. You know, focus on the home that you want. Focus on the neighborhood that you want. You know, if this is the time, if financially and in your life stage, this is the time to buy, then you can navigate that market with an expert like myself and get into the right home, regardless of a tick up or a tick down with interest rates. So yeah, just don't follow the herd, ignore those stats, and just focus on your lifestyle. Focus on, you know, what it means to you to move into that new home, you know, what your kids will think, the kind of experiences they're going to have in that new home. That's what you should be focused on. Don't focus on the stats. It's not helpful. So my 3 pieces of advice for sellers. Most important thing is recognizing as a seller that you have the most control. You know, buyers are kind of at the whim of the market, what's available. They can't change that. They can only pick from what's available. However, when you decide to put your home on the market, you have control of how that home is marketed, who you choose to market that home. You have control over what that home looks like, the condition it's in. It's really important to prep your home and make sure that it looks amazing. You're gonna wanna stage your home either with your existing furniture, or there's virtual staging, there's physical staging. Talk with someone like myself to get advice on staging your home. But one thing you definitely wanna do is you wanna get a pre-listing inspection. Find out before it's too late, before there are surprises, find out the condition of your home. Find out what's going on with the roof, electrical components, plumbing components. Figure out whether you need to make some of those repairs to give yourself the best return possible. So all that is preparation. Control how your house is prepared and how it looks to the public when you list on the market. I think I alluded to this earlier. Another piece of advice for sellers is don't wait too long. I think a lot of people, they wait till late spring, early summer, and you've got a lot of competition there. You got other people listing at the same time. You got things that didn't sell right away that were listed earlier in spring, and you just got a glut of competition with other homes for sale. The buyers are ready. The buyers are out now. So if you're a seller, get out as early as possible. So I do think the timing is important as a seller. Everyone might not be in that position, but when somebody really wants their home, maybe they can work out a delayed closing. You'd be surprised. Talk with your real estate expert that can guide you in the right timing of listing your home for sale. And finally, my last piece of advice for a seller is to test the market. Pricing a home is the most difficult challenge. You don't want to leave money on the table. You don't want to list it too low. I think that's everyone's fear. But the number one problem is people list too high and it gets dead in the water and people really struggle. They lose leverage and they're just chasing the market down. So you can test the market if you work with a Compass agent like myself. Give me a call, give me a text. I'll visit your home. I'll walk you through what your options are. But we have a 3-phased marketing system where we list it privately, then we list it publicly, but only on compass.com. So it's in a coming soon status. And then we hit the MLS. It's sort of like going into the MLS is like a big splash. Everyone just like cannonballs into the deep end, but you don't have to do that. You can gradually work your way, sort of beach entry into that pool. When you list it privately, you can test out prices. You don't get penalized. You don't have a days on market. So we can test aspirational pricing. We can get feedback from other buyers and other agents about the condition of your home. We can kind of fly below the radar and only accept the deal that is going to work for you. And then eventually we can get to the MLS. That's a great option. The 3-phase marketing is a way to test the market without consequence, without penalty. So give me a call. I'll be glad to walk you through in more detail all the steps of the 3-phase marketing system. So whether you are buying or selling or just curious about the real estate market, I hope you have found this video helpful. Again, it is important to understand the nuances and what's happening in the market. But at the end of the day, it's not about the stats specifically. It's about executing. And if you want to execute, you got to work with an expert that can sit down with you and explain your options and what's going to be the right move for you. So I'd be glad to do that. Whether you're thinking of buying or selling, reach out, call me, text me, set up a consultation. We'll walk through your options, make sure we develop a plan that works for you and gives you the outcome that you're looking for. Thanks for watching and welcome to Pittsburgh.